Dinner is still exquisite and elaborate, but lunch, I don't know what the man has done with lunch. It's awful. And he is hired as an agent for the railroad, a gentleman who sells tickets to the public, a man who is even more gruff than I am. You wouldn't want to have me in your face. Well, you don't want this gentleman either. He is not the right kind of man to have contact with the public. Even worse, they have jacked up the price of a round-trip ticket from Saratoga to $1. Can you believe it? $1. And they pack up the little train cars. People have to stand. It's outrageous. I was interviewed this summer by a reporter from New York City who told me that a ride from Manhattan to Coney Island is only 50 cents round trip. $1 from Saratoga? I know the rich and the famous go to Saratoga, but $1? I began to become disillusioned when that happened. And I'll tell you what the last straw was. It happened this June. Had to do with General Grant. General Grant's train pulled in at the little depot. The general, always an extremely dignified man, attempted to walk from the depot to the cottage. And he failed. He collapsed partway up the hill. All of us followed his story. All of America knew that the general was a dying man. Some of my friends from Saratoga, veterans of the Union Army, members of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Veterans Organization, planned ahead. They knew that the general would have a difficult time ascending the hill. So they set up a chair midway between the depot and the cottage. They were right. The general virtually fell into the chair. They thought he would rest and then proceed. He couldn't move. He was utterly exhausted. Those two old veterans picked up that chair and carried the general to the cottage. Those veterans, James Minnick and John Fryer, you may know John, he's the Saratoga police chief. Shortly after delivering the general here, were about to go home. They were about to get back on the train. And Mr. Fonda scurried down from the hotel to thank them for what they had just done. And his way of thanking these two selfless men was to give each of them $1 so that they would have a round-trip ticket on the railroad. They ripped the ticket up. They threw it at his feet. It is... The management of the hotel has just lost touch with what really matters to people. And I've had it up to here with them. I sold them 1,000 acres here on the mountaintop. I kept 500 for myself. And I am giving very serious consideration to opening my own hotel and giving them a little competition. I think they deserve it. Now, I am getting on in years. I might not tackle that project. I'll have to think about it. So let me, instead of hypothesizing about the future, let me tell you a little about the past. Pertaining to the McGregors specifically, I know that you have heard that I am a direct descendant of Rob Roy McGregor, the Scottish Robin Hood. If only it were so. I will tell you about Rob Roy in a few minutes, but I will try to explain where this rumor began. It began in Iowa. In 1841, President Van Buren, wanting to settle the West, was virtually giving away for free land grants in the Wisconsin Territory. And my brother Alexander got one of those, and he went out to Prairie du Chien, which is technically in Wisconsin Territory, on the Mississippi. directly across from what is now Iowa. He began buying up property on the Wisconsin side. And then my brother James went out to join him, James Jr. Now James he has missed his calling, is what I'm trying to say. He has a scientific mind, James. You men who work with wood, you know how planing wood is so difficult? My brother James patented a machine which will do the planing of large pieces of wood for you. His mind works in a wonderful way. I wish he had pursued that line of work. Regrettably, he didn't. He went west and joined Alexander. Here's what my brothers did. They looked across the Mississippi to the Iowa shore, and they saw immigrant trains sort of stalled on the Wisconsin side. No bridges. No way to get across the Mississippi to continue west. So, my brother Alexander established a ferry from Prairie du Chien across the Mississippi to the Iowa side. My brother James became involved in all the land transactions. Over the course of a few years, on the Iowa side, a true community grew up. It began with warehouses, but then it became a community where families began to raise their children. I would like to tell you there is an equal number of churches with bars in the town. It's the Wild West, virtually. The name of the town in Iowa is McGregor, Iowa. I'll say as an aside, Alexander and James, because of all these land transactions, had a falling out, went to court, sued and countersued. The issues spilled over to the old farm here in the valley. I don't want to elaborate on that. But here's what I will tell you about the Rob Roy myth. Alexander was looking for more settlers in McGregor, Iowa. So he produced a pamphlet that not only talked about its ideal location on the river, but sought to romanticize McGregor, Iowa. He claimed in his brochure that the founder of McGregor, Iowa, himself, was a direct descendant of Rob Roy. That in fact, he Alexander, possessed the original Clan McGregor seal and signet ring, a bloodstone from Loch Lomond. Alexander was a terrible liar. Don't believe it. But that is where the myth began. Now, I want to go a little further back in time because I have some surprising stories to tell you. I hope they will surprise you in any case. The McGregors were always a small clan. I think we existed in Scotland from before the Dark Ages, when the local savages were fighting the Vikings. In any case, the Clan McGregor always was a small clan. And small clans always are dominated and pushed around by the big clans. One of those big clans was the Clan Campbell. All right, the McGregors were always on the side of the fighters for Scottish independence. They were at Bannockburn, many, many places that you would know from Scottish history. When Robert the Bruce, who was essentially Scotland's first king, was installed, the McGregors and the Campbells went to him. There were many land disputes between the clans. They wanted Robert to settle these disputes. Robert sided with the Campbells. The Campbells took virtually all of the McGregor land. The Clan McGregor became fundamentally homeless. They became thieves to stay alive. Great rustlers of cows and sheep, and they became so good as thieves that some of the clans began to pay them money not to rob them. One of the greatest of the thieves was Rob Roy McGregor. All right. He was called the Scottish Robin Hood because allegedly he stole from the rich to give to the poor. The poor were the McGregors. Well, in any case, the McGregors continued to be a thorn in the side of the Campbells and many of the Scottish clans who went back to what was then the king. Robert the Bruce was long gone. The English crown essentially had taken over Scotland. And you would think, perhaps, something like this occurred. Maybe the kilts had been outlawed periodically through history. You might think that the McGregor tartan would have been outlawed as punishment. It was more than that. In 1603, the king outlawed the very name McGregor. You could not admit to being a McGregor. It was against the law. You had to assume another clan's name. Rob Roy, incidentally, very clever, he adopted the name Campbell. So he blended in very well with his old foes. All right. This went on for 170 years. It was illegal to admit you were a McGregor. I told you the date, 1775. That was the year it finally became legal again to admit you were a McGregor. So, my father, born that year, was the first McGregor in 170 years, in the first generation, who could wear the kilt without being sent to prison. This kilt meant the world to him. It was a way of reclaiming his heritage. And I wear it very rarely, but I wear it to remember him. And now a story I love to tell. The McGregors, during the period they were outlawed, assumed many different names. One of the names they chose repeatedly was Grant. The clan Grant was very small, like the McGregors. Very often, especially in the 1300s, the McGregors and the Grants were like that. They stormed the clan Comyn's castle together. That castle is now the home of the clan Grant in Scotland. Consider what this means. For hundreds of years, the McGregors and the Grants intermarried. And then, for 170 years, many McGregors assumed the name Grant. I think it is entirely possible, highly likely, that Ulysses S. Grant and I are related. Way back in the mists of time, I am confident that our two families must have intermarried. So when General Grant came here, most unexpectedly, I thought it was like a coming home. I don't think he knew of the connection between the McGregors and the Grants, but I did. And it was as if I was welcoming him home. This was the place he should be. This was the place. If you don't mind, I'll change the tone very briefly. The clan McGregor came from a place called Thon Hill on Loch Tay. And my father learned a song, which I will not sing to you. I have no voice for song. But I want to read a couple of lines from the Loch Tay boat song. And I want to give you a theory about this. No, I'll give you the theory first, because it'll be easier on you.